was 19 years old and engaged to be married, but she had never been intimate with a man. But the doctor handed her the medical report so she could see for herself. "You're already well along in your pregnancy. You're not in good health, so I'm afraid an abortion would be too risky for you. Your only option at this point is to give birth to the child." Nora returned home in a daze. After her father gave her a stern lecture, he searched the surveillance cameras for evidence. But all he found was that 4 months ago, Nora had indeed stayed home for a couple of weeks because she hadn't been feeling well. She hadn't gone out at all. Outsiders didn't believe it. Everyone secretly mocked her. Her belly is already so big, but she's still giving excuses and saying that she didn't go off and see some man. Poor Anthony Gray, being engaged to a woman like that. I feel bad for him and his family. She's already fat and ugly, and her family background is nothing to brag about. She was lucky she even had this opportunity to crawl up the social ladder with a marriage into the Gray family. Now that she's gotten herself pregnant before the wedding, the Grays will break off the engagement, right? After weeks of the speculation flying around, Anthony Gray finally paid the Smiths a visit. He sat down with Nora and her father in the study. By that time, Nora's belly was already bulging. 8 months into her pregnancy, her belly was so big she couldn't see her toes when she looked down. Nora's father asked cautiously, "Anthony, are you thinking of breaking off the engagement?" But Anthony's answer surprised him. "No, my grandfather wouldn't allow it." The Grays were rich and powerful, with a social standing far above anything the Smiths could dream of. No one would blame them for taking this opportunity to break things off. There didn't seem to be any way they could benefit from going ahead with the engagement. The more Anthony thought about it, the angrier he became. He cursed furiously. "I already can't stand the sight of her pig-like face. Now she's pregnant with some other man's child. Why should I have to take responsibility for her screw-up? I'm not interested in being a hero." Immediately, Nora's father said, "Anthony, don't worry. I'll send the baby away as soon as she gives birth." Nora, who had kept quiet this whole time, suddenly raised her head. No. In the past few weeks, she had gone from shock to bewilderment, and then gradually settled into a state of acceptance. She could feel her child's heartbeat more and more clearly as each day passed, and she had grown to love the sound. The child was innocent. She had decided she couldn't abandon it. She wanted to cancel the engagement too. At that exact moment, Nora suddenly felt waves of pain and convulsions in her abdomen. "This is it," she thought with alarm. "I'm going into labor." 5 years later, Nora was awakened from a nap by the sound of a crisp, chirpy voice. "Mommy, wake up, the plane is landing." Nora opened her eyes to see a young, delicate, adorable little face. Cherry Smith's large eyes blinked, and she rested her chin on her hands. "Mommy, why did we come back to the States this time? Are we looking for Daddy?" Nora stretched and sat up lazily in her comfortable business class seat. She said lightly, "You don't have a father." Cherry sighed like an adult. "I don't believe you. I'm not a 3-year-old anymore. Of course I have a dad. Everyone has one, right?" Nora didn't reply. She just sighed as she tied up her shoulder-length hair. Her fair skin and sharp, pert nose, coupled with her rosy lips and graceful figure, made her a beautiful sight on the plane. Cherry continued to mumble with dissatisfaction. "If we aren't looking for Daddy, then are we looking for my big brother?" Big brother. A cold glint flashed across Nora's downcast, almond-shaped eyes. 5 years ago, she had actually given birth to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. But Nora's father had ignored her wishes and tried to take the 2 children away. She had fought with everything she had to try and stop him, even while she was still confined to the delivery bed. In spite of her struggle, she had only managed to save Cherry. Nora had ended up in a critical condition. If her aunt had not rushed her overseas to recuperate, she didn't know if she would have survived that horrible time. It had taken her the best part of those 5 years to recover. A change in routine and medications revealed that an incorrect prescription of hormones had been the cause of her obesity. During her extended recovery period, the extra pounds had shrunk away. As far as anyone else knew, she was returning to the States now because the Grays had finally agreed to call off her engagement to Anthony. She was simply there to sign the papers and wrap up the details. But Nora's real mission, the most important thing, was to find her other child. Half an hour later, the plane came to a complete stop. Nora let Cherry sit on the luggage rack while she pushed it forward. As soon as she turned on her cell phone, it began to ring. On the other end of the line was a frivolous but lively voice. "Athena," the person said, using the name Nora had chosen for work. "You have to be careful." Nora asked casually, "Why?" "Justin Hunt is on a global hunt for your personal information. Do you know how well connected he and his family are? He's not going to give up until he finds you." The voice sounded a little like its owner was gloating. "Oh," was all Nora could think to reply. "Athena, you were overseas before, so you weren't in his territory. That's the only reason you were able to avoid him. But now that you're back, you won't be able to escape anymore. You're the most prestigious surgeon around. Can't you just treat his grandmother and get it over with? I've heard Justin is a very generous and very handsome man. Wouldn't it be great if you two got swept up in a big, dramatic, scandalous affair?" Nora yawned lazily. The Hunts were highly influential in the business world, but they were a sprawling family with notoriously complicated relationships. Nora knew that taking on a Hunt as a patient might get her dragged into a struggle for power and inheritance. Why would she stick her nose into the public or private matters of such a rich and powerful family? She had come back to the US to look for her son. She couldn't get involved in any complications. As she approached the exit, Nora spotted a familiar figure in the arrivals area. Without thinking, she replied to her caller, "I'm not lucky like that, but thanks." After hanging up, she tossed the phone in her pocket and cast her eyes downward coldly. She hadn't expected to see this particular old acquaintance so soon. A man stood at a prominent spot at the exit of the airport. He was wearing a suit and looked quite bright and cheerful. He looked a little more mature than he had 5 years ago, but he hadn't changed all that much. There he was, her fiancé, Anthony Gray. With a pickup placard in his hand and a big smile fixed on his face, he stood impatiently and grumbled, "When exactly is that damned woman coming out?" From behind him, his assistant said, "Mr. Gray, please be patient. Your grandfather has specially instructed you to refrain from making things too unpleasant, even if you are calling off the engagement." Anthony frowned, ruining his cheerful act. "Patient? I'm disgusted. She was a mess before. She must look even worse now. I bet she'll want to save the engagement even more now, right? How did I get stuck with someone like her?" Nora heard every horrible thing he said, but she didn't bat an eye. In the past 5 years, she had repeatedly brought up her desire to break off the engagement. Neither the Smiths nor the Greys had respected her wishes. Who exactly was stuck with whom? She couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to that man. She planned to leave immediately with Cherry. After he finished his grumbling, Anthony turned, and his eyes lit up. A beautiful woman was walking toward him, the first to come off the flight. She was gorgeous, unbelievably stunning. It was as if the entire airport had lit up a few notches brighter the moment she appeared. As the woman drew closer and closer, Anthony straightened his back and neatened his luxury suit. Then he smiled and asked confidently, "Hey, beautiful, may I ask your name?" Nora thought, "He looks just like a peacock with its train spread open." She paused and looked at him coolly. Nora Smith. Nora Smith. Cherry pointed to the placard in Anthony's hand as she slowly read out the name written on it in her young, tender voice. She was just learning how to read by sounding out words. She asked excitedly, "Did I read it right?" Nora rubbed her head and said in a cool, melodious voice, "Yes, you did." Anthony was dazzled by the little smile playing at the corner of her lips as she looked down at her daughter. Where had such an amazing beauty appeared from? This woman was absolutely stunning. It didn't cross his mind for a second that she could be Nora. Nora was indifferent to the burning fervor in his eyes. Cherry, on the other hand, blinked and asked innocently, "Mister, are you here to pick?" Before she could finish her question, Anthony tossed the placard behind him as fast as he could and interrupted her. Of course not, little girl. I have nothing to do with that ugly lady. Disbelief appeared in Cherry's big eyes. Which part of her mum was ugly? Mister, what are you talking about? Are you going blind? That's sad. Her words stunned Anthony for a moment. Taking advantage of the opportunity to escape, Nora stepped away coldly. Anthony wanted to go after her, but his assistant stopped him. Mr. Gray, don't forget your father's instructions. Anthony watched Nora as she walked away with Cherry and muttered under his breath scornfully. How great would it be if that ugly freak was even half as beautiful as her sisters? Maybe I would have put up with her disgusting behavior and not had to call off the engagement. In the presidential suite of the Hotel Finest, a Hunt Corporation hotel, Nora scrolled through her cell phone after putting Cherry to bed. She already had 7 or 8 missed calls from her family. On returning the first call, she was greeted with an angry tirade from her father. Nora, what are you doing? Why aren't you picking up? You were the one who made all this fuss about breaking off the engagement. Get over here and stop wasting everyone's time. Your younger sister and Anthony have got something good going. Don't ruin it. It was impossible for Nora's father to let go of the Greys after climbing the social ladder and establishing a connection to such a prestigious family. That was why he had refused to break off the engagement between Anthony and Nora all these years. But now the Greys had finally relented and agreed to let Nora's half-sister marry into the family instead. The two families had reached an agreement. It was all the same to Nora's father, as long as one of his daughters married Anthony. Nora said lightly, I'll come over now. She entrusted Cherry to Mrs. Lewis, the nanny that had travelled with them to the US, and went out. While she was waiting for the elevator, she heard some soft footsteps behind her. She turned to see a child dressed in grey silk pajamas with tousled short hair, standing in the elevator lobby and looking around with sleepy eyes. Her daughter had short hair, and her exquisite, adorable facial features made it hard to distinguish whether she was a boy or a girl. And when they were living abroad, Cherry would always give Nora a hug every time she went out. It seemed perfectly normal for her daughter to come and wave her off, so Nora didn't think much about it. She just squatted down as she always did and hugged and kissed the child on the forehead. Although her voice was low, it was gentle. I'll bring you some chocolate mousse cake tonight, baby. Go back to your room now. Her daughter's usually quick-witted eyes became dazed for a moment. Nora figured she was probably so sleepy that she had turned silly. Then she nodded and turned around and walked away. They were staying on the top floor of the hotel in a luxury presidential suite. There was only one other suite on the same level. Apart from the one Nora and her daughter were currently booked into, it was said that the Hunts kept the other suite free for their own use, so it was not open to guests. Nora figured there was not likely to be anyone staying there. The elevator chimed as it arrived. Nora went in right away. She was gone so quickly that she didn't see the door to the other presidential suite opening. A tall, striking figure walked out. The man's back was to the elevator entrance. His voice was low and deep, and he had an imposing aura that was hard to ignore. He ordered the child, Go back to your room, Pete. 5-year-old Pete Hunt, the only grandson of the family, was still staring in the direction of the elevator. The soft hug and the kiss on the forehead had made him blush uncontrollably. Pete's face scrunched up tightly. He had been brought up strictly ever since he was a baby. Every one of his meals was carefully created to give him the best possible nutritional value. But a strong desire suddenly emerged in the boy, who had always been taught to exercise such strong self-control. He announced, I want to eat some chocolate mousse cake. Justin Hunt was bemused by the child's response. He picked him up and carried him back into their suite in one arm. Exuding an icy aura that many people found intimidating, Justin walked over to his computer and continued the video conference he had been in the middle of. The person on the screen gave him their report. Mr. Hunt, we've confirmed that Athena has indeed returned to the States. On top of that, we've just secured a photograph of her. It didn't come cheap either. I'll send it to you right away. Justin's thin lips parted slightly, and he coldly spat out 2 words. Find her. It was brightly lit at the Smiths' villa. Outside